What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Today, we're talking our top 15 overall consensus player rankings for this 2020 fantasy football season. We're taking into account performances from last year, projections for this 2020 season, and appropriate risk for each one of these players and their respective situations. Now, these rankings are coming straight from our 2020 ADP Fantasy Football Draft Guide. So if you guys are interested in a more in-depth breakdown and a longer, more in-detailed list, go ahead, get yourself a copy now. All the details in the description, and also check out our all new and updated website at alldaypigskin.com for some exclusive content. If you guys enjoy, hit that like button, subscribe. But for now, let's get right into it. We kick off our list with none other than Christian McCaffrey, and probably to nobody's surprise, McCaffrey comes in at number one. And for what it's worth, you're going to see a lot of running backs to kick off this list, but that's the name of the game when it comes to fantasy football. Running back is the most important position. And when you're talking best overall running back for the season, Christian McCaffrey is that guy, whether it's standard or full point PPR formats. So we don't want to go too into this. Now, sure, there might be some people that say, well, the separation between a McCaffrey and some other top tier running backs isn't all that much, if any, if this is a standard format. And yes, that's true. But when looking at the overall contribution, there is no running back in the entire NFL that's a better pass catcher than Christian McCaffrey. And in fact, used at that position as much as Christian McCaffrey. There's a reason why McCaffrey was only the third ever running back in NFL history to join the 1,000 yard club last season as far as rushing and receiving yards. And honestly, we think he could get close to that again this year. On top of this, let's not forget that McCaffrey last season was second in receptions in the entire NFL, regardless of position. He was only behind Michael Thomas. He had 116 receptions on the season. Now, yes, you're going to hear a lot of people say there's going to be a natural regression anytime you have a monster season like that. And yes, we tend to agree. The fact is that this Carolina offense, we don't know whether it's going to be as good as it was last year, better, or possibly even worse with all the new additions that they have had. So we could very well see the rushing yards decrease by right around 200. We definitely anticipate the total touchdowns to decrease because McCaffrey was number one in that category at the running back position with 19 overall combined touchdowns. We think that number could go down by 2 or 3, maybe even 4. But where that safety net comes is at the reception and receiving yard total, because we firmly believe that McCaffrey can get to that 100-yard reception number yet again. Right now, we've got him going for 100 receptions for 950 yards and 5 receiving touchdowns. The rushing yards a little bit lower at 1,200 compared to almost 1,400 last season. And again, with Teddy Bridgewater under center for the Carolina Panthers, and if that offensive line struggles, you better believe that there's going to be a lot of dink and dump passes to Christian McCaffrey, and he's got a pretty safe floor, probably for a combined 100 yards total on a week-to-week basis. He is their entire offense for the most part. So for that reason, we feel pretty confident in having Christian McCaffrey come in at number one for 2020. Coming in at number two, we have got Saquon Barkley of the New York Giants. And if there was any player on this list that could potentially usurp Christian McCaffrey as the top overall guy, it would be Barkley. There's a reason why a lot of analysts are touting Barkley as the number one potential running back in 2020. For one reason, his rushing yards. He's projected to be one of the favorites, even per our own rankings, to win the running back rushing title in 2020. And he admittedly does have a higher ceiling in that category than a Christian McCaffrey, slightly better offensive line as well. But the reason why we have Christian McCaffrey a little bit ahead of Saquon Barkley is that receiving number. Because even though Barkley could put together 70, 75 receptions, we don't see him getting close to that triple-digit number for receptions. Right now, we have him going for 70 receptions and 650 yards. The rushing yards, though, should make up for that, as we have him slated for 1,450 yards and 13 rushing touchdowns. Now, as far as looking at what Barkley did last season, it was a bit disappointing considering where he was drafted, because he did deal with an injured ankle that did linger for a good portion of the season. But when you consider that he still finished as the 10th overall running back across all formats, it makes Barkley even that much more impressive. He had 1,000 rushing yards, 6 rushing touchdowns, 52 receptions for 438 receiving yards. And honestly, we expect improvement in all those categories, but that should naturally happen when you have a healthy Saquon Barkley. Now, one of the reasons, again, why we don't necessarily have him as high as Christian McCaffrey is when you look at all the weapons for the New York Giants, there's a lot of other pass catchers there that can go ahead and take some volume away from Barkley. Consider Sterling Shepard, Golden Tate, Darius Slayton, Evan Ingram. Those are 4 very, very viable options. Daniel Jones will also from time to time go ahead and rush the football. Now, that's not a category that he excels in or that he's necessarily going to go ahead and prioritize on a week-to-week basis. We fully expect with a healthy Saquon Barkley, the plan for the Giants to be to rush the football. But with the anticipated talent there at the pass-catching position, we don't necessarily feel as comfortable to give Saquon Barkley as high of a reception number as some other analysts might. For that reason, he comes in at number 2 on our list. Coming in at number 3, we have got Ezekiel Elliott of the Dallas Cowboys. And similar to the other names we've mentioned before, Zeke is no stranger to a top overall running back expectation and a top overall scoring fantasy player on a year-to-year basis. In fact, last season, he finished as the running back 4 and running back 3 in standard and PPR formats, respectively. He played a full 16 games yet again, which again shows you that as far as durability is concerned with Ezekiel Elliott, that is not an issue. Now, some people might point to the fact that Travis Frederick, the center for the Dallas Cowboys, retired this season, which is definitely a loss and it will hurt, but we've seen Ezekiel Elliott, particularly in those same situations where Frederick was not available, succeed. So for that reason, we aren't necessarily all that worried about that loss. And if you consider this, out of all the names we've mentioned so far, Zeke is by far the running back with the best offensive line in front of him for this 2020 season. Now, some people might say, well, the downside, the risk, if you will, if there really is any risk with Ezekiel Elliott, is that he doesn't have all that many blow-up games. But he's still very consistent, and he'll put together top 10 finishes on a week-to-week basis. He just necessarily might not have that 30, 40-plus point game in him like some other names that we've mentioned and will bring up later on. But let's not forget that consistency is something that's also very valuable in top overall players. And that is definitely the case for Ezekiel Elliott. Right now, we've got him going for 1,400 rushing yards, 14 rushing touchdowns, 60 receptions, 550 receiving yards, and 3 receiving touchdowns, which is honestly pretty similar to what he posted last season. Last season, he had 15 overall touchdowns. This year, we've got him going for 17 overall. Our rushing total right now would only be about 40 yards of improvement. The receiving yard number only improving by about 100 yards. So again, pretty similar territory compared to last season. You did see Dak Prescott improve a lot in 2019, which we believe is a good thing for this entire team because as the passing attack becomes more viable, then Ezekiel Elliott becomes even that much more dangerous to go ahead and just explode unexpectedly on a defense. For that reason, we are still very high in Ezekiel Elliott. No more contract situations to deal with him like last season. Pretty much full steam ahead when it comes to Ezekiel Elliott. You know you've got the durability. You know you've got the consistency. So you should feel pretty comfortable about having him as a top 3 type of overall player in 2020. Next up at number 4, we've got Dalvin Cook of the Minnesota Vikings. And by far, probably the most controversial name on this list, at least this early on. We still see Dalvin Cook as a tier 1 running back in 2020. But let's go ahead and address the concerns that people might have. First and foremost, the injury history, because by far, Cook has had a longer injury history compared to the top 3 names that we've mentioned so far, and even some of the names we'll mention afterwards. He did play 14 games last season and stayed healthy for the majority of the year, and even though he missed 2 games, he was still the running back 5 and running back 6 in standard and PPR formats, respectively. And we really like Cook because he offers this rare combination of having a high rushing ceiling, but also a pretty high reception and receiving yard ceiling that could put him in the Saquon Barkley and Ezekiel Elliott category. through 14 games, he had over 1,100 rushing yards, over 50 receptions, and over 500 receiving yards. Now, keep in mind that we also had the departure of Stephon Diggs from this Minnesota offense. Those receptions will go somewhere. Sure, Adam Thielen, some of those other wide receivers will go ahead and benefit from it, but so will Dalvin Cook, who proved last season he was a very viable dual threat type of running back that can be used as a rusher, but also as a pass catcher. Combine that with the fact that this mentality of the Minnesota Vikings to be a rush first type of team is something that greatly impacts Dalvin Cook and should be the case again for 2020, along with the fact that Kirk Cousins is probably better off as being a game managing quarterback. Dalvin Cook will again get a lot of volume heading into 2020. Now, Cook also did have some contract concerns that maybe had some people scared off initially for him a couple of weeks ago, but those have proven to be a little bit more so overblown than initially expected. He will be suiting up this season. He will be playing. He will be reporting. The last thing we do want to mention here is maybe some individuals are saying, well, Dalvin Cook, I don't usually see him as a top 4, top 5 selection in my drafts. Usually I might see an Alvin Kamara. So let's go ahead and address that, because the difference with those two running backs in particular is that Dalvin Cook doesn't have that Latavius Murray type of backup behind him, or at least doesn't have that game plan offensively where the backup running back has individual value on the offense. Alexander Mattison is that backup for Dalvin Cook, and even though he proved viable and capable, he's mostly going to get playing time when Dalvin Cook is either A, injured, is getting rest, or when it's a blowout for the Minnesota Vikings. Otherwise, it's the Dalvin Cook show, and we feel pretty comfortable in terms of overall talent and combined upside in the rushing and receiving category. The Dalvin Cook is probably closer to that Saquon Barkley and Ezekiel Elliott category than a lot of people expect, and then he's going to go ahead and be a pretty good value pick in that first round for a lot of people again in 2020. At number 5, we have got Alvin Kamara of the New Orleans Saints. And like we told you, we'd be mentioning Kamara's name sooner rather than later. Now, definitely Kamara is someone that has more value in PPR formats, but as far as consensus rankings are concerned, he comes in at number 5 still. Because let's factor in all the upside associated with Kamara. First and foremost, he is on a high-octane offense that is a top 10 unit year in and year out with the combination of Drew Brees and Sean Payton. That is as consistent as you can get. They're a very high-scoring offense as well, which generally helps. And they also play in the NFC South, which should be a goldmine for fantasy football this season. That means the New Orleans Saints will be playing the Tampa Bay Bucks twice, the Atlanta Falcons twice, and the Panthers twice as well. And at least 4 of those 6 games should be very high-scoring affairs. And all those weapons for the New Orleans Saints will have a lot of success. Now, as far as maybe some of the risk associated with an Alvin Kamara, let's go ahead and start there, because he definitely has the lowest rushing upside compared to the other running backs that we've mentioned up until this point. Last season, through 14 games, he put up about 800 rushing yards. But keep in mind that last season was one that we really haven't seen from Kamara before in terms of him being injured and that lingering for the majority of the season. He was the running back 16 in standard formats and the running back 9 in PPR format. So that's a great example there of seeing how he differentiates from format to format and maybe how you want to go ahead and tier him, rank him, depending on the league you are in. But again, incredible upside as far as the reception total is concerned. 81 receptions through 14 games last year for 533 yards. Those numbers should go up. In fact, he's averaged 81 receptions so far throughout his career. Incredibly consistent. Something that potentially could hold him back is the presence of Latavius Murray. And this was still the case when Mark Ingram was there. Now, that's not to say that Alvin Kamara cannot be that number 1 overall running back and be the workhorse, because we saw it when Ingram was suspended a couple years ago for the New Orleans Saints. Kamara was an absolute stud with monster games for those 3-4 weeks. But then what the Saints prefer to do is have that veteran experienced guy to go ahead and spell Kamara so they can go ahead and use him as a pass catcher in those opportunities that really matter more so throughout that game and keep him fresh. So for that reason, the presence of Latavius Murray, who's a viable handcuff, unfortunately also means he has some standalone value that will take away from the upside of an Alvin Kamara. But for what it's worth, we actually believe that Kamara is probably the most Christian McCaffrey-esque type of player in the league in terms of someone that can get to a 1,000 type of season. He is still the number 2 pass catcher on this offense behind Michael Thomas. We think he can get close to that 90 reception number and get close to 700 receiving yards, and that would be very impressive. Now, the rushing yard number here is really what we will have to pay attention to. Right now, we have him going for close to 1,000 yards, a little bit under it, 950 rushing yards. The combined rushing touchdowns should see positive regression, which will be nice. He only had 6 combined touchdowns last year. This year, we believe that could very well be doubled, so that's some nice upside there. Overall, Alvin Kamara is someone that we're very excited about. He's very versatile. He offers that home run ability to absolutely explode and win the week single-handedly for you. But also know that he loses value in standard formats. If you're looking for a pure rushing running back, maybe you should go ahead and look elsewhere. But overall, we have him ranked as our running back 6 and running back 5 in standard and PPR formats, which should mean pretty close to a top 5 overall fantasy player finish in 2020. At number 6, we've got our first wide receiver on the list so far, Michael Thomas of the New Orleans Saints. The consensus number 1 overall wide receiver heading into 2020, and after the type of season that Michael Thomas posted in 2019, it's hard not to have him ranked this high. He's been someone that's been incredibly consistent and durable throughout his career, and last season was absolutely the cherry on top. He led the entire league in receptions, in fact, breaking an NFL record in doing so for 149 receptions, over 1,700 receiving yards, had 9 receiving touchdowns as well on top of that. Now, yes, will there be some slight regression in those numbers? Probably. The return of a healthy Alvin Kamara will naturally do that. So will the addition of an Emmanuel Sanders. But Michael Thomas, make no mistake about it, is still the number 1 option for Drew Brees. And he does not miss opportunities, which makes him even that much more valuable. Now, if you want to go ahead and have him ranked a little bit lower, if you're in a standard format type of league, again, it does make sense because receptions are a big part of what Michael Thomas does, because yet again, he's probably a shoo-in for close to 120 receptions, which is what we have him projected for, and going for close to 1,500 receiving yards and 10 receiving touchdowns, which should be pretty good numbers and should put him in that top 5, top 6, 7 type of range as far as all fantasy players are concerned. But even last season, in standard formats as well, he was still the number 1 overall wide receiver with Drew Brees under center. Even without Drew Brees under center, with Teddy Bridgewater still there, Michael Thomas still got it done, which makes him even that much more impressive. He is the most consistent wide receiver as far as fantasy football is concerned. He really doesn't have any dud games, but he also has the possibility of those blow-up games as well, which is really the perfect combination for any fantasy player. He's in a great offense in a great division, like we said, in the NFC South. That should be a gold mine for all fantasy football players there. We expect him to be the number 1 wide receiver again in 2020, and with the type of upside he has, especially in PPR formats, he should be a surefire top 10 overall player. At number 7, we have got Clyde Edwards-Helaire of the Kansas City Chiefs, and our first and only rookie on this list. Talk about what a difference one piece of news can make, and that in particular here is obviously Damian Williams opting out, because if this was prior to those news breaking, well, Clyde Edwards-Helaire would have no business being this high or even on this type of list. So for that reason, we have to adjust our outlook for him in 2020. And when you do so, you look at a player with serious upside. Because the fact remains now that CH is the number 1 running back on this offense, an offense that should be one of the best, if not best overall scoring offenses in the entire NFL and thus fantasy football. It's going to be very high octane, producing a lot of scoring opportunities, and also has arguably the best quarterback in the entire NFL under center in Patrick Mahomes. Andy Reid is an offensive genius as well. It's no fluke that he's had a plethora of top 10 fantasy running backs. Talk about guys like Kareem Hunt, Jamal Charles, Brian Westbrook, LaShawn McCoy, DeMarco Murray, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire could very well be that next type of running back on this list to follow. He comps pretty well to potentially what Kareem Hunt did his rookie season. Right now, we've got him going for over 1,000 rushing yards and close to 50 receptions for close to 500 receiving yards as well. And yes, obviously there are risks here. First and foremost, Clyde Edwards-Helaire is a rookie. He doesn't have experience in the NFL, and the fact that due to COVID, there is no preseason and that the preparation and the chemistry isn't going to be as high in years past for these rookies, and they might have a slower start than prior, can be concerning. But when talking specific standalone upside, there might not be a player with higher upside than Clyde Edwards-Helaire, because when you pair him up, like we said, on this offense, there will be plenty of opportunities, so much so that he could very well on his own be a top 3, top 5 running back. So if you believe the hype, if you believe in this offense and what it can produce, and you buy the situation, that you should absolutely be buying Clyde Edwards-Helaire. He's going to be a big part of this receiving game as well for the Kansas City Chiefs. So again, he should be a pretty balanced overall running back. As long as he can stay healthy, he will be in a lot of opportunities to succeed. So for that reason, we like him a lot in 2020. Continuing on at number 8, we've got Derrick Henry of the Tennessee Titans, another running back. The trend continues, but at this point, we've probably gotten to the place where you're going to see these running backs excel in one category or the other, but not necessarily both. And Derrick Henry definitely fits that bill, as he is a bruising type of running back that will excel in pure rushing. But when it comes to pass catching opportunities and upside there, Derrick Henry doesn't really have all that much upside. But let's look at what he did last season, because he was the league rushing leader with 1,540 rushing yards. He finished as the running back 2 and running back 5 in standard and PPR formats through 15 games played. He had 16 rushing touchdowns, but only 18 receptions for 206 receiving yards. So, what's a fair type of projection for 2020? Well, in terms of rushing yards, we think that he will again vie for that rushing crown with around 1,400 rush yards for probably, again, 14 to 15 touchdowns. The receptions is where you're going to be disappointed if you are in a PPR format with Derrick Henry. So you do have to appropriately adjust these rankings potentially if you're looking specifically at PPR type of running backs. Then you might have some other names a little bit higher. But again, as far as consensus overall average placement for these rankings, Derrick Henry does belong in the top 10. He is the offense for the Tennessee Titans. They've got a good offensive line there, and they feed the ball to Derrick Henry, who is that primary guy. They finally unleashed him last season, and the Titans, with Vrabel, they want to be a run-first type of football team. Now, the biggest question mark here is not with Derrick Henry, it is with Ryan Tannehill, because the Titans just paid him a lot of money. And Tannehill hasn't always been the most consistent quarterback. He put together a very great season on a memorable run through the playoffs for the Titans in 2019. But will that continue? We can't say for sure whether you're going to see the same type of Ryan Tannehill. And if his production decreases, then so will the ceiling for Derrick Henry. So that's the main risk associated with Henry. As far as durability, we're not really all that concerned there. Pass catching, you know what you're getting from Derrick Henry. It's all about Ryan Tannehill and what he will bring to this offense. If you have faith in Ryan Tannehill that he will go ahead and produce a similar type of season to last year, and that there won't be a lot of drop-off from the Titans offensively, then Derrick Henry should be a pretty locked-in type of running back for you guys, type of overall fantasy player in 2020. We do expect some decline in this offense, but Derrick Henry's skill set should be able to go ahead and overcome some of that. So we're still having him pretty high on our overall list. Next at number 8, we have got Joe Mixon of the Cincinnati Bengals. And Mixon was a guy that was incredibly hot and cold last season. He started off the year as someone that was arguably being considered as a release, and then finally finished the season incredibly strong. But that was the type of year that the Bengals had, very up and down. Now, with the addition of a future franchise quarterback, people expect that to be normalized. Mixon was the running back 11 and running back 13 overall in standard and PPR formats. He played 16 games. He had over 1,100 rushing yards for 5 rushing touchdowns. The receptions, only 35 for 287 receiving yards. So that's something that you could point to here. Again, Mixon isn't one of these running backs that necessarily excels in that category, but we do see upside. We do see the skills for him to get more and more involved, to potentially make that type of leap that we've seen for an Ezekiel Elliott or that we've seen for a Todd Gurley in years past. Now, it probably won't happen all at once this season, but we expect an improvement pretty much across the board. Pretty much a more balanced type of season, positive regression in overall touchdowns. The biggest question mark here for the Bengals will be the rookie quarterback in Joe Burrow. Do you believe in him to go ahead and bring more balance to this offense? Because if the Bengals are playing from behind, then Joe Mixon will lose a lot of value, as is the case for any running back on a struggling offense. But if Burrow can go ahead and be what the Bengals project him as the number 1 overall pick in this year's draft, then the arrow should be pointing up for everyone on this Cincinnati offense. We like the upside for Joe Mixon because of his room for improvement in the pass catching category. Right now, he's probably more of a standard suited type of running back. Giovanni Bernard is still there, who's more of that pass catching type of guy. But Mixon can go ahead and get it done there. It's all about whether he's given the opportunity. At the end of the day, though, he should be someone that you see being a top 10 talent, similar to what he did towards the end of 2019. So go ahead and invest a pick in Mixon this year. At number 10, we have got Julio Jones. And this is where you might start to see a little bit of a run on wide receivers. And Julio Jones, maybe not as high in some people's eyes, but we still view him as an absolute no-brainer tier 1 wide receiver. That should be the next guy up after Michael Thomas. He's our number 2 wide receiver across all formats. And yet again, he benefits from playing in the NFC South with arguably a top 5 unit around him on the Atlanta Falcons with an MVP type of quarterback in Matt Ryan. Last season, Julio Jones was top 5 in receptions. He was number 2 in receiving yards, only behind Michael Thomas. And oh yeah, let's not forget that this Atlanta offense, even during a down year, was number 1 in the entire NFL in pass attempts. So that tells you that this is a pass-heavy team and that Julio Jones should get a lot of opportunities. There's also a lot of other weapons there to go ahead and take away coverage from Julio Jones so that he isn't doubled all the time and so that he can go ahead and dominate games. Up-and-coming talent like a Calvin Ridley, for example. And the addition of Todd Gurley will help the rushing attack, which again will trickle down to the passing attack as well. Another year with the current offensive coordinator should also go ahead and build more of that chemistry and make things easier for this offense. Overall, we love Julio Jones. We think when you're talking projections for 2020 that Julio Jones will get close to 100 receptions, around 1,350 receiving yards, and around 7 receiving touchdowns. Overall, he is our number 2 wide receiver across all formats. Probably a little bit undervalued by some people at this point in time, but we've got all the confidence in the world in this Atlanta offense, and Julio Jones should be set up for another great year in 2020. Moving on to number 11, we have got Davante Adams of the Green Bay Packers. Still a tier 1 wide receiver in our eyes for 2020, regardless of the season he put together in 2019, where he was the wide receiver 29 and wide receiver 23 in standard and PPR formats, respectively. But keep in mind, this was obviously due to time missed related to an injury, only played 12 games, had 83 receptions, and still almost 1,000 yards receiving with 997. Now, yes, the concerns are that the Green Bay Packers want to be a run-first type of football team, and that how much will Aaron Rodgers be allowed to really do what he wants? And do the Green Bay Packers still believe in him to be a top-notch quarterback? Whether that's the case or not, for what it's worth, we still believe that Aaron Rodgers can sustain a number one wide receiver, and that is by far Davante Adams. Because even though the Green Bay Packers didn't really add anything in terms of wide receiver help in the offseason, the only player was Devin Funchess, who opted out. Davante Adams is the one constant force there, and that proved to be the case last season, where pretty much on every single occasion, Aaron Rodgers looked for Davante Adams. And it should be the case again in 2020, and probably even more so. So for those reasons, we think that even though this is an offense with probably a run-first mentality, that the volume alone will go ahead and boost Davante Adams up into tier 1 wide receiver category. He's done it before as the only wide receiver on this team, if you think back to 2 years ago when he really had that breakout season. So we know he can go ahead and get it done in 2020 with a healthy Aaron Rodgers, with a healthy Davante Adams. Adams should be in that top 15 list and a top 3-4 wide receiver for 2020 fantasy football. At number 12, we've got Austin Ekeler of the LA Chargers. And Ekeler had an absolute breakout season in 2019 as he took full advantage of the Melvin Gordon holdout situation. And even after the return of Gordon, Ekeler still finished as the running back 7 and running back 4 in standard and PPR formats. Now, for what it's worth, Ekeler is definitely a much more PPR-suited running back here, but he should see an overall increase stat-wise probably, as Melvin Gordon is now a member of the Denver Broncos, and Ekeler controls this backfield, on top of that, having just gotten paid by the Chargers. But the question is, how much faith do you have in a non-Phillip Rivers-led LA Chargers offense? Because that's what the value for Ekeler and pretty much every single Chargers offensive player will come down to. Do you believe in Tyrod Taylor and potentially Justin Herbert? Because we could see some type of quarterback carousel if the offense is not playing up to its potential. They've got all the pieces, but the quarterback is the huge question mark here. Best case scenario would probably be Taylor playing the entirety of the season, but even if that happens, we don't see the same type of ceiling for Ekeler in the pass-catching department, which is a bit concerning. However, favorably speaking, you should see an increase in rushing yards and rushing touchdowns, just general rushing opportunities. So that is a positive and could counteract the loss in receptions and receiving yards. Last season, Ekeler had 92 receptions for 993 receiving yards. So that is the type of potential that you are talking about with Ekeler here. He had close to 600 rushing yards, and we think that that category can improve. But again, expect some decreases in the receiving yard category. Ultimately, this is a pick that will be a lot more valuable in PPR formats, so adjust accordingly. And if at the end of the day you believe in this Chargers offense and Tyrod Taylor, you could very well have Austin Ekeler ranked higher, and he could be in store for another big year. Next, number 13, we have got Kenyan Drake of the Arizona Cardinals. And with Drake, he falls into that similar category of an Alvin Kamara, of an Austin Ekeler. Maybe a bit more PPR suited, but he has major breakout potential. In fact, with no more David Johnson in that backfield, you could argue that Kenyan Drake has similar upside to what David Johnson faced in 2019. Drake proved last season that he can go ahead and be that pure rusher for you, but at the same time, we've seen while he is in Miami, he also excels as a pass catcher. Last season, he finished with 817 rush yards, 8 rushing touchdowns, and then 50 receptions for 345 rushing yards. But keep in mind, the bulk of his rushing yards he put together when he arrived to Arizona, so we can't necessarily fault him for the struggles that he had while in Miami. On top of this Arizona offense with another breakout candidate in a Kyler Murray really has its arrow pointing upwards. It should be a high-scoring offense. The addition of DeAndre Hopkins will produce more high-scoring opportunities, and as that feature back, Kenyan Drake should really have some serious upside. We have him getting close to 1,000 yards rushing, and then the receptions is where you could really see some great performances with around 65 receptions to close to 500 receiving yards, all being in the realm of possibility, which makes Kenyan Drake a very intriguing target for 2020 with serious upside. Coming in at number 14, we have got Tyreek Hill of the Kansas City Chiefs, another example of what can happen when you are on that great Kansas City offense with Patrick Mahomes throwing you the football. And in this case, this is arguably one of the favorite targets of Patrick Mahomes. Tyreek Hill, unfortunately, last season was hurt by two things. One, his own injury, and then also the up and down play of Patrick Mahomes, as he was also not 100% throughout the entirety of the season. But what remains true is that Tyreek Hill, maybe more so than any other wide receiver in the entire NFL, has the highest ceiling of pure explosion on a week-to-week basis. He has the speed that in the blink of an eye, in 2 quarters time, he could have 30 plus points. And even though he might not be the most PPR suited type of wide receiver, as his ceiling for receptions is probably close to that 80 mark, his yardage totals should be pretty high, along with his touchdown totals as well. Last season, it's tough to go ahead and put all that much stock into it, as he only played 12 games, finished as the wide receiver 28 and 32 in standard and PPR formats, but still got close to 1,000 yards at 860, still had 7 receiving touchdowns. So you see that upside. We believe with a healthy Tyreek Hill, with a healthy Patrick Mahomes, we're going to see Hill production from 2018 and from 2017 that made him a surefire first-round wide receiver across all formats. And finally, coming in at number 15, we have got Mike Evans of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And admittedly, Evans is one of our guys at the wide receiver position that we think will have a huge year and is being extremely undervalued at this point in time. No doubt the addition of Tom Brady helps out this entire offense, as it should bring some more consistency on a 16-game season as opposed to Jameis Winston last year. Also, don't forget, you've still got the Bruce Arians factor, which means that this should be a very pass-heavy and high-scoring offense. You've got the fact that the Bucs are in the NFC South, will play the Saints and Falcons twice a year each. So you're going to have some very high-scoring opportunities. Now, yes, some people might be worried about the presence of Chris Godwin, who did outscore Evans last season. But we actually believe that the separation between Evans and Godwin won't be all that much. And you're probably in one of two camps. You think that Evans might be a little bit higher in terms of upside, or Godwin. We happen to think that Evans is a little bit higher upside because of his receiving touchdown number and because of the big playability that he has, similar to what we saw with the Randy Moss and Tom Brady back in the day. Now, Evans, also keep in mind, only played 13 games last season, yet still had 67 receptions, over 1,150 receiving yards, and 8 receiving touchdowns. We think those numbers can get to 80 receptions for 1,275 receiving yards and close to 8 receiving touchdowns. Honestly, we view Mike Evans as a very Tyreek Hill-esque type of player. So for that reason, while he might be maybe more suited as a standard wide receiver, we love his upside for 2020. So with that, we wrap up this look into our top 15 overall players. And as always, let us hear it in the comment section. Did you agree, disagree? Who is on your own personal list? And who do you believe will have huge type of years in 2020? Along with any other fantasy questions you guys might have. And as a reminder, go ahead, get yourself a copy of the 2020 ADP Fantasy Football Draft Guide if you want to see breakdowns like this and more, including more in-detailed breakdowns. All the details in the description. Also, go ahead and check out our website at alldaypigskin.com for some exclusive content. If you guys enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe. But in the meantime, we'll see you guys in future videos.